Today we are in Leviticus chapter 11. Leviticus 11 is a very, I would say, popular topic, but not read by most people. Reason being is that this is a chapter on the dietary law, how God instructed the children of Israel as to what they can eat and what they cannot eat. And so for the longest part, most people think about the Israel nation and the Jewish people as people who don't eat pork. But in this chapter, you would see that it is far bigger than not eating pork. And so let's take a closer look at chapter 11. Chapter 11 begins this way. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. You remember when he first started in chapter 1, it was always Moses. And then when we hit chapter 8, then it was directed from Moses to Aaron. Now it's to the two of them, so that the two of them is to speak to the children of Israel. Now the two of them as leader, Moses as the leader and Aaron as the high priest. These are more particular to the way of life and in particular the offering, the sacrifices, as well as now their lifestyle. So there are three areas to talk about them: things that they can eat and things that they cannot eat. At the same time, the things that they can eat is classified as clean. Things that they cannot eat is classified as unclean. And we need to be very clear that when the term we use clean and unclean is also with regards to how we deal with the things of God when they come to the sacrifices and offerings in the tabernacle, which Aaron himself and his children must deal with as well, because Aaron must be clean and his children before they can deal with the sacrifices that has been brought by the people. And hence, these are the rules. And at the end of this chapter, we will then wrap this up because there is a deeper meaning to this concept. Now, let's take a look at this. In Genesis chapter 9, after the flood, the children of Noah, right? Noah, his sons, and the descendants thereafter, God gave the permission to eat the flesh of living things. But you cannot take the blood or eat the blood. And number two, you cannot eat the animal when it is still alive. And number three, you cannot kill another human being, because the idea of killing has come into play. And so in chapter 9, God says, as he has given all the green plants or green herbs and the fruits for food, so God has given all animals as food. But respect the sanctity of life. So there must be a proper way to slaughter the animals. Do not torture the animals and do not eat them while they are still alive. Now, when we come to Leviticus chapter 11, God has a more specific and narrower view of the diet. And this is actually specifically, as I had mentioned to you, the children of Israel. It's not directed to everybody. It's directed specifically to the children of Israel. In chapter 9, it's directed to Noah and all his descendants, which we are included. But in Leviticus chapter 11, it is directed to just the children of Israel, for them as a special nation, a holy nation before God, to listen to what God says. And so these are the words. These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. To the nations of the world, it would be all the animals that are on the earth. But to the nation of Israel, only these. And this is the rule. Among the animals, whichever divides the hoof, having cloven hoofs, and chew the cud, you may eat. And so these are the rules. Dividing of hoof, cloven hoofs, chew the cud. Now let me first explain to you how this works. Divides the hoof. So if you have a horse, this is a single hoof, right? A single hoof. You need to have animals that has division of hoofs. That's the idea, division of hoofs. Then you have cloven hoofs. Cloven hoofs means it will be like this. Cloven hoofs. Okay? And so you need to understand that a horse and a camel, right, is not a cloven hoof. So you have to look at the feet. So God says, look at the feet. Plus, chew the cud. Now that's also important. What does chewing the cud mean? Chewing the cud means as the animal eats and swallows, it regurgitates out and chews again and swallow. So animals like sheep, like goats, like a cow, right? They've got multiple stomach. So it actually comes back out and then it goes back in, and that's chewing the cud. So let's now take a closer look at exactly what God is saying to the children of Israel. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud or cloven hoofs, the camel. You would always realize that we don't really talk much about camels with Israel, and largely because they don't use camels a whole lot. They use horses a lot more, right? Now, the camel chews the cud, meaning it eats, swallow, and come out, and swallow, and come out, and swallow. That's chewing the cud. But they don't have cloven hoofs, and so it is considered unclean, not accepted as a ritual to God. Then you cannot offer a camel, right? And so you are not supposed to eat that camel as well. And if you do, you will be unclean. One of the other things that you find is that in Islam, the Muslims, on the other hand, eats the camel. And so they have their own dietary law as well. But their dietary law doesn't have these rules as we have just read, which is divide the hoof, cloven hoof, and chew the cud. There are no such rules in the other religions. Only in Judaism, right here in the Bible, telling the children of Israel, camel, that is a no-no. Although it chews the cud, it does not have cloven hoofs. And down in verse 5, there are a number of animals that we can talk about here, and I will admit to you, in some cases we don't actually quite understand and know exactly what are those animals. The rock hyrax. Some say it's the rock badger. Now, how does it look like? Don't quite know, right? It says it chews the cud, but no cloven hoofs. Unclean to you. The hare. Now, what is the hare? In this case, the hare I think it's not like what we think as hair today, right? Many commentators think that this is already extinct, right? Choose the cut, no cloven hoofs, unclean to you. The swine, the pig, right? It divides the hoof, right? Cloven hoofs. The pig has cloven hoofs, right? If you eat the bakute, the pork trotters. So the hoof itself, the leg itself, passed the check, having cloven hoofs, but it doesn't chew the cud, so it's unclean to you. So you can look at this as a rule by looking at the animal of their feet and looking at the behavior of digestion. Their flesh you cannot eat, and their carcasses you cannot touch. That is unclean to you. So you look at this, all this to you is with reference to Israel. To the Israelites, no can touch and no can eat. And that's why they don't eat the pig, because it only passed one of two categories. Divide hoof, having cloven hoofs, right? But doesn't chew the cud, does not chew the cud. So it is unclean to you. And that is the reason why the Jews don't eat pork. Now, for the longest time, the issue of pork seems to be the most divisive. Should you eat pork or should you not eat pork? From Genesis chapter 9, you need to understand that even when God allowed mankind to eat meat, that was not the original intent of God. Because the destruction of the world was so great, there's a change to the environment. God allowed man to eat meat. And at that time, all kinds of meat, but must slaughter properly. And here, to the Israelites, you can't. There's an even smaller number. In fact, most animals the Israelites cannot eat. Only a very small number that they can eat. And so now we are seeing a more stringent observation because of the relationship of God with Israel. Now that was on land. So if you look at the verse 9, those that are in the water. And when they're in the water, they are swimming in the water. And so what can you eat in the water? The rule is it must have fins and scales. Whether in seas or the rivers, you can eat. Notice, fins and scales. Now, when you have fins and scales, and if you can eat and if they don't have fins and scales, then it is an abomination to you. Now, the idea of abomination is like how the word used, it is unclean, right? It is detestable. You must stay away. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. So what you can see now as a rule, when you cannot eat, is unclean. You can't even touch the carcasses because the carcasses is an unclean thing. So whatever in the water does not have fins and scales, do not touch. Which tells us that they will not eat shark. So no shark's fin, no catfish, right? And so on and so forth. Okay, and that is important. So there is no eel, and that's something which they have to pay attention to. Now, after we look at the ones in the water, we look at the ones that is flying. These are the ones that is an abomination, unclean and detestable. And by detestable is to tell them, stay away, stay away. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. What is it? the eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, the falcon, and all its kind. The raven, the black bird. Raven means black, as Noah sent out a raven. The ostrich, you don't eat, right? The owl, the seagull, the hawk after its kind, the little owl, fisher owl, all kinds of owl, right? The vulture, the stork, heron, and including the bat. All of these you don't eat. And one of the reasons also I think we can see is that many of these are what we call, they are carnivorous, and they are also, how should we say, not just carnivorous, they are cleaners. They eat up all the animals that have died, right? Like vultures and buzzards and all those. And so they could be eating all kinds of diseases as well. But for them, they were designed such that they don't get hurt. And so they clean, they are the cleaners of the sky, of the earth. And they come and clean that up. And so in the ones in the sea, crabs, lobster, prawns, all those, the crustacean, the shellfish, they are the ones that clean the sea. And so they are, I suppose, more toxic than others. And similarly, some of these birds as well. Verse 20. All flying insects that creeps on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours. Now you notice, you may think, well, insects have 6 legs, isn't it? Typically, you find that there are 4 that points back and the front 2 that points front. So the front 2 is considered their hands. The back 4 is considered their legs, right? So they creep on all fours, and you can eat some of these which have jointed legs above their feet, which is to leap on the earth. What does that mean? So it means that if you have an insect, right, that is like that. So this is what it means by jointed legs above their feet. Who are these? What are these? The locusts, right? The locusts. Eat the locusts, as many as you want. Today, nobody eat locusts. You know that? As we have been told, in Africa, in East Africa, as well as West Asia, there is a millions and millions of locusts are coming over, and they are destroying crops. One of the things that has been suggested to them is to introduce a diet of locusts. Catch the locusts and eat them because they are full of protein. And so these are the locusts. God says, eat them. Cricket, eat them. Grasshoppers, eat them. But see, to us, we think that these are all for birds, right? We just feed the birds. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination. So if you want to eat insects, these are the few that we can eat. And they are usually found also in the wilderness. Okay. Now we talk about the unclean animals. By these you shall become unclean. Means by this you shall become unclean, not the animals unclean now, right? This is the person becomes unclean. This is important. We first, in verse 1 to 23, we talked about the animal classification. Now in verse 24 onwards, it's about how a person is construed or viewed by God. God will view a person unclean if he touches, you see here, the carcass of any unclean animals. He will be unclean until the evening. And whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them must wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. So what you can see is that this will be unclean, and he cannot go to the temple. He cannot touch anything else. He has to stay by himself until the end of the day. Verse 24, the carcass of any animals which divides the foot, but is not cloven-footed, does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Now you notice here, we're talking about the carcass by default. Whoever touches this carcass becomes unclean. So God is saying it's the person. Now we're talking about the person. It may be an unclean animal you don't eat, but you touch the dead one, you are also unclean. So in the eyes of God, the person becomes unclean means the person cannot come to God for the time being, right? And whatever goes on its paws among kinds of animals that goes on all fours are unclean to you. Now, if you look at verse 27, what does it mean on the paws? Meaning on the palm. This would be the palm. If the animals have palms and goes on its palms, then you can't eat them. What could this be? If you look at it, it would be, I don't know, the bear, the monkeys, the cats, the dogs, right? These are the animals that goes on all fours, and they will be unclean because they don't chew the cud. Whoever touches such carcasses, see, they are unclean animals, but you can't touch them because the carcass is unclean. So whoever carries the carcass also must wash the clothes and unclean until evening. So that's the rule of carcasses of unclean animals. Now 29. Let's see. Let me shrink this a little bit. This is a long section. I think we need to see it as a whole. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth. When he says creeping, it is not our English word creeping. It is like on all four running around. And this would be the mole, the mouse, the lizards, the gecko, the monitor lizard, all these reptiles, right? And these are unclean among all that creeps. You touch them when they are dead, you are unclean until evening. So you don't go and eat lizards and stuff like that, right? If any of them falls when they are dead, shall be unclean. Whether it touches on the wood, the clothing, the skin, or sack, whatever the item is in which work is done, then it must be put in water to wash. It will be unclean until evening. Then it will be considered clean, which means that these items cannot be used in the sacrifice as well. So the priest can't use any of them. So the priest needs to know what is clean and unclean. Any earthen vessel in which any of them falls, you shall break. And whatever in it shall be unclean. Pour away, don't eat. Such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean. Right? Any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. Which means that if these animals fall into it, you don't touch it. The principle, I think, is clear that when it's unclean, anything that these carcasses and whatever falls in, the utensils, the things that it touches are all unclean. Okay? Whether it's an oven or cooking stove, it shall be broken down. They are unclean and shall be unclean to you, and you don't use it to bake your unleavened bread to bring to the tabernacle. Nevertheless, if a spring or a cistern, these are areas where water comes out and you carry water, and there's plenty of water, it shall be clean. But whatever touches any carcasses, it will become instantly unclean. So that's the rule. Any unclean carcasses makes everything unclean. So if a part of such carcass falls on any planting seed which is to be sown, it remains clean. That's the difference. But if water is put on the seed, and if part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. Now, this is what you need to see. The first part, if any part of such carcasses fall on any planting seed, which is to be sown, it remains clean. It means that these are the raw seeds. Okay? The second one, if water is put on the seed, these are seeds germinating. And these become unclean. So you can tell the two types of seed. The raw seeds are considered dead. So unclean touches the dead, no problem. But unclean touches life, that's a problem. And so we don't use those seeds. Verse 39. If any animal you eat, if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcasses shall be unclean until the evening. What does that mean? It means this: if you have a sheep and before you slaughter it, the sheep died. And so if you touch it, you are unclean until evening. He who eats of his carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. If you eat the dead sheep, you also must wash your clothes. He who carries the carcass also must wash the clothes, unclean until evening. 41. Every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. Don't eat any of this. Whatever crawls on its belly, one of the things that crawl in the belly is the snake. We don't eat the snake, right? Whatever goes on all fours, whatever has feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth like the lizard, you shall not eat, for they are an abomination, right? You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping things, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled, made unclean. For, okay, now this part is important. Let me just change the color. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore be holy yourselves. Consecrate means to set apart. Okay? Set apart. Which means being holy. Okay? And you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourself with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am the Lord, I am Jehovah, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. In this context, we are beginning to see that God is teaching them that the animals that they eat define them to be holy or unholy. God is holy, God is special, so he can be identified by how the Israelites behave, what they don't eat. Things that other people, other nations eat, they don't eat because they have a rule given by God, what they can and cannot eat. By the other people seeing Israel, Israel becomes a holy nation, that they are special, they are unique, they are not like everybody else. And we go on in verse 46. It says, this is the law. Verse 46. And by law, it means Torah. Right? This is the Torah. The instruction. The instruction. For what? For the animals, the birds, and living creature that moves in the water and that creeps on the earth. This is the instruction that is given to who? To Israel. Not to the rest of the world, to Israel. Why? Because they have to be able to distinguish. What is to distinguish? They must be able to know the difference. Right? That is the intent. They are to know the difference so that they can separate or set apart. When they set apart what they eat, they also set apart themselves, and by extension, they become set apart for God, and they are holy. And that's what it means. Between the clean, unclean, and the clean, between animals that you can eat and animals that cannot be eaten, so that they are a special nation, a holy nation before God in the world. Because I am the Lord your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy. I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. So here we are beginning to see what is holy. All right. Why is it that the animals they eat can show that they are holy? Now, let me just show you in some graphics. In Genesis chapter 9, all we can eat. In Leviticus chapter 11, out of all can eat, then this one is clean. And the rest all cannot eat. That is the difference. Okay? That is the difference. Only these you can eat. And whatever you do, make sure that we can see what is clean and unclean. In the eyes of God, God is using animals and food to teach the Israelites. If you follow what God has said with regards to the animals on the land, the birds that fly, and the creatures that's in the sea, what you can eat, number one, what you can touch as well, and whatever you are not supposed to touch, then you are not supposed to touch, right? And so clean would mean that this is Israel, and this is the rest of the world. The rest of the world is considered unclean to God because they have not done what is acceptable in God's sight. And to Israel is to teach them to know how to obey. And what is the best way of teaching them obedience? The stomach. What you can eat, what you can't eat. By your behavior, you are separated from the world. And hence, Israel is called to be holy, to exist as a holy nation by what they eat and cannot eat. And based on what they can eat, you notice, based on what they can eat, a small portion is for sacrifice. So, for sacrifice is only taken from the clean animals, not the rest of the animals. So you find that most of the animals you can't eat, and then those that you can eat, only a small portion that you are to use for God. And that is how we see this pyramid, I guess you can call it, right? God, Israel, and the rest. Because the rest eats everything. Israel can only eat some, and part of the some, God will want it as his offering. And so by this, it is to teach separation. set apart. Which means this: if you are set apart, you only eat this, you are different from the rest of the world. And thereby, you are now considered holy, set apart, different. Okay, so this is what you eat. And so that is how God is using food and dietary law to teach Israel how to behave and not to be like everybody else, because they are to come to the tabernacle where God is. And when they come to the tabernacle, they must be clean. And with Aaron and the sons who were serving in the temple, in the tabernacle, they too must be clean. And hence, the atonement that is given in the earlier chapters is to clean the utensils, the altar, as well as themselves before they deal with the offering of the people. The ritual itself teaches Israel what it means to be holy. See, today we say holy, you're holier than me, you always say that you don't do this, you do that. So we have a general concept of holiness, but the biblical idea of holiness is that you are different, you're set apart, you're special. Why? Because your behavior is different, you eat differently, you do things differently, you worship a God differently than everybody else. That is how Israel is supposed to be a holy nation. And so in our lives today, we are to demonstrate holiness because our character is different. That we should be different because we owe our allegiance to God, a living God. And so his character must come through our lives that the rest of the world can see that we are different. Now, the dietary law, on the other hand, like what we have read here, is for Israel. Some people believe that we should follow, right? And I have no problems with people following this rule, and good for them, good for them. But these are things that you cannot force others to do. The principle I have told you earlier up front is this: God's intention actually is don't eat meat. And that's the point. So he allowed Israel to eat a whole lot less. Because at the end of the day, God's intention is for us to eat plants. Not meat, but meat was because of after Genesis chapter 8, right? The flood. And so the rule in Leviticus 11 is about holiness. God is holy. You obey and be different from everybody else. And if you were to come to me, do not defile yourselves. That's the rule. So in general, just observe what God has said, so that when you come to the tabernacle or come to the temple or you serve in there, God can accept them as they are, because they have not done anything that has defiled themselves. Okay? And with that, we come to the end of chapter 11. Any questions?
哇，好彩唔係我哋Chinese way. I seem to eat everything under the sun.
Yes. The Chinese eats everything. Well, they said the Chinese, as long as your back faces the sky, you can eat.
係咯，做乜講？哎呦，好彩。
But I think there are goodness also, right? Certain animals, if you eat them, we are more susceptible to get problems.
但係隻 monitor lizard 啊，係啲係冇人食嘅，你攞去用嚟浸酒啫，米酒啫。certain things 啦。
Chinese will use all kinds of things to try out the potency.
Now Thailand 一定 grasshopper lagi Thailand.
Actually, Thailand eats all kinds of insects, not just grasshopper.
Fried 嗎？
All kinds. But here it says, God says, because the leg is higher, it's got a joint. Those are the insects that you can eat. The rest of the insects you don't eat because those bugs, many a times you don't know where they come from and they could be carrying all kinds of diseases.
Yeah, right.
That actually, the rule is to keep them safe also.
Our human teeth,
yeah.
Our human teeth is the set of teeth we have got mostly for grinding, I think. But we do have canines, incisors for tearing. So I don't know. I'm thinking if God made our teeth that way, actually He prepared us for some sort of meat eating.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Let me give you an example. The vampire bat. The vampire bat has all sharp teeth. All sharp teeth. But they eat fruits. Right? So I think by just looking at the teeth, I don't think we can conclude that it was designed for certain things. But definitely the sharp teeth helps in tearing flesh. And the molars is used for crushing. And so God, I guess in his wisdom, has given us some variety in the mouth for different purposes. Again, yes, that's wisdom of God. But I do believe that the God's intention is very much for vegetables. If you remember in the wilderness, they complained nothing to eat, and God gave them manna. And manna tastes like vegetables. And manna was given to them for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted meat.
So
So God gave them quail.
Quail.
But only once or twice. It's not everyday meat, but it's everyday manna.
Wow, that means the Buddhists going back to vegetarian, that means they are quite right about their belief.
Okay. The vegetarian concept by Buddhism and Hinduism is very different from the Bible. So in the Bible, it is about green vegetables, green herbs, and fruits that has seeds, or that kind of thing. So that you find that you have enough, like herbs. That's the idea of I guess vegetarian. So I don't think they have eggs or milk and stuff like that. Now, some of the vegetarian, they also don't eat bulbs, like onions and garlic, right? Even tuber meaning the roots, they don't eat that as well. So maybe they are closer to what God has done, has said in Genesis chapter 1. I don't know.
But it was sort of confirmed that if we were to be eating less meat, we will have healthier bodies.
Absolutely. That's why God says the fat belongs to me. And so we also like fat. And these are the things that is actually not good for our body. But it tastes good. And so the lifespan of man is shorter.
It makes sense.
Okay. So this is the conclusion of our Dietary Law chapter, Leviticus 11. All right.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Right.